I think we should start by introducing ourselves. I'm Nabila, and I'm your moderator for this session of how to write a graphic novel.
Yeah, sure. I'm Stephanie Cooke. I am a writer and editor. I primarily work in middle grade and young adult spaces. That's me.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Joaquin. People call me Kino. I write science fiction mostly. An anthropologist and a biologist in my first years. Then I became a film director, which is a kind of virus. You never hear of a film director becoming a doctor, but you can see a doctor becoming a filmmaker because the virus only works one way. And so I became one of those, and I got into the habit of making storyboards, which at some point led. Uh, One of my friends told me that we could maybe make a kind of comic book or graphic novel of our scripts. So suddenly I was doing graphic novels, and my main thing for all these years has been animation. So I'm kind of crossing those two fields, making animated graphic novels now, which is the thing. Still on the world. One of these hands works. This one, the in this world of the Road to Xibalba, which is based on the Popol Vuh, a sacred book of the Maya Quiche, told as steampunk. So there am I.
Hi everyone, my name is June. So I used to work in public accounting, but I always really loved drawing. And basically, I started posting my comic online on Webtoon back in 2017 as kind of an escape from just like my day job, my day to day, like not wanting to do my accounting work job. And within a year, like an editor had reached out and basically like offered me a contract to work for Webtoon. And so somebody offers you a contract to do everything you've always wanted, like to draw comics for a living. It's like, oh, of course I took it. So kind of like after 5 months of working in public accounting, I basically like quit my job and I went to work for Webtoon. So I am the creator of a comic called Sub Zero, and it's basically fantasy and romance and dragons, kind of like all a little bit of everything that I like to read. And it's I'm very proud of it because it's amassed about 3 million subscribers over the last 5 years, and it's soon to be a print graphic novel as well. So yep, that's me.
Yeah, my name is Wilson Guillaume, and I am one of the creators of A Dark Child. It's a supernatural thriller based on Haitian folk. I am originally from Miami, Florida, and me and a group of guys got together after college, and we decided to make a comic one day. And from there, we, continued working on it. The first book of Dark Child was Dark Child issue 1, Death of My Past. It was just a brief introduction. And then from there, we finished up issue 2. And now we've just finished issue 3. This is, both issue 2 and 3 are is called Voyage to America. So essentially, my background is in animation, actually. And we pitched some ideas here and there, and so things are looking pretty good with Dark Child.
So I'm Jreije. I'm the Arab American author of the Shad Hadid series, as well as the upcoming graphic novel Tarek's Bizarre Adventure. Thrilled to be here.
Where do you begin once you have an idea for a graphic novel? Stephanie.
I guess it depends. It's all like a little bit depending on what your own personal process is. And for me, once I have like a kernel of an idea, I like to go back and forth between kind of figuring out the general story direction, some kind of like loose plot points, and also kind of figuring out what kind of characters fit into the world that I potentially have in mind. And it's a bit of a process going back and forth between that and the plot. because I kind of think as I discover a little bit more of the characters and flesh out who they are, that informs more of the story too as I go. And then again, as I figure out more of the story, that sometimes informs little bits of the character, and it goes back and forth as everything kind of develops and we figure out the setting, maybe if there's magic, how that magic system works. And I like just kind of taking things slow, asking myself questions, asking questions of my characters, and kind of developing the story into something fuller. And as somebody who is a writer and an artist, but mostly just for myself, I don't do my art for my graphic novels. I like to create Pinterest boards to visualize the story, kind of create mood boards, aesthetics, and I'll doodle characters for myself and try and kind of rough out what they'll look like. But those usually don't make it to the actual pitch or anything else. They're more just for me to be able to get to know these characters in my head. But I go back and forth until I have something solid to start building the actual script and the story from.
For me, I guess it's a bit of story development from there. Being able to create or figure out who your characters are and what is the world around them. Because that you want to be able to at least understand what your character's limitations are, what is the world's limitation as well, and build from there, understanding where their journey will go, how will it lead, who they'll interact with. And for me, when creating Darkchild, that was pretty much the challenge. You know, I wanted more or less the real world, but then there is a supernatural element within that real world. So I have to respect the rules of the real world, but tying a supernatural feel to it. For my character, she's a 9-year-old girl. So I had to really think realistically, how exactly would a 9-year-old girl behave in a situation where she is surrounded by the paranormal, where she doesn't even understand what's happening in her own world. She's facing tragedy, you know. So it's very psychological.
Process is never the same, depending on the kind of. What I mean is, you might be provoked about a story by an element of the story. Say, just to throw something out, a machine of some kind that you started, like Stephanie was talking about sketching characters. I start sketching whatever catches my attention, and it might be a character, it might be an element of the story, it might be a visual thing, or it might be a place. Sometimes it's even emotions or situations that I try to sketch first, but the story is the first element. From that thing, whatever it is, I'm going to derive a yarn, a tale of some sort. So I work on that first. Then I go for the design of the characters / world. I think that the plot is characters and characters are plot. So they are embedded in the story I'm telling. I don't worry about them. I just try to see how they look and what they think. And I do that by paying attention to the way they behave. I know it sounds weird, but they're already behaving in my head. There's things I see about them that's where I start. I actually write first prose version of the thing. So I write a novel, and then I make the novel into drawings because it helps me. It's way faster than staring for ages and ages at a blank page, trying to figure what's next. So instead of an outline, I prefer to write my dialogue and my scenes. I write a novel kind of quickly and without editing, but there's the novel. And when I edit it in the drawing side.
For me, like drawing, and I've always like loved just drawing and also telling stories in general. Like I feel like a lot of people, it's to me, it's mostly about like trying to convey an emotion that you feel and like you want like your reader base to feel the same way. And so again, for me, it was always kind of like an escape. I wanted an escape from my job, so I created a story that I would like to read. So I think first and foremost, like you have to be really into your like story to begin with in order for you to for that passion of yours to kind of come across the screen. And I mean, I usually suggest kind of writing not necessarily the thing you know, but the thing you want to know more about. So, I was very knowledgeable about a lot of dramas back then because I was watching a ton of dramas. So I wanted to create that, but also give it a fantasy element. So I chose to add dragons. I think the weird part about webtoons specifically is that when I write, it's mostly like I visualize images from like almost as like a director standpoint. So I see the images first and I lay out the dialogue later. So I write in sketches, honestly. I start by sketching the chapter first and then I'll add the dialogue later. And the weird thing about Webtoon is that we have weekly deadlines. So every week I'm contracted to have, I usually do like 80 panels, but the contract is 60 panels per episode by the end of the week. So I think the challenge is, how do you like create an interesting, unique chapter? Because like not every single plot point is going to be like the most amazing, climactic chapter. So you have to make very mundane things interesting, I think. So and basically like the way I see it is like when I've written it down on paper or as soon as I've made a chapter, I can't really go back. So every chapter I feel like I lay down breadcrumbs that have potential of turning into something else like later on in the story. And the way this is still my first comic, so I'm not like a trained writer or or even like a trained illustrator, to be honest with you. So yeah, I feel like I just lay down breadcrumbs and then with an idea in mind of what I want it to become. And then later on, as the story progresses, those breadcrumbs turn into something bigger. But I have to be certain that the route that I take and the one that I choose to publish at the end of that week is going to blossom into something later. Because I think there's nothing worse than just like putting down a plot point that goes like nowhere later on. And that's just like the nature of webcomics. I think that to a point I'm also a little bit not inspired but influenced by comments, because I see comments every week, and sometimes I can feel like I can almost predict what the reader base is going to say, like whether they hate this chapter or they like this chapter. And I'm like, I think I have to keep in mind to myself that the audience like doesn't exactly know what they want. They think they know what they want when they like spam the comments with something, but I'm like, it's okay, trust me, I'm leading you down like a good path. just stick with me.
I think the answer for me does not change whether it's a graphic novel or a regular novel. And I give workshops on this. And similar to what Kino was saying, it starts with character for me. You get the story idea, and then you immediately have to jump into the character, which will drive the plot, the conflict, and everything else. For that, there are two elements. There's the internal motivation of every character, which is the most critical element. And then, of course, there's the external motivation, from which the conflict will kind of derive. And once I figured those out for the main character and maybe the antagonist, I can start to just draft the story. With graphic novels, something that I don't do with regular novels like Shad Hadid, pointing the wrong way, Shad Hadid, is write a synopsis, because I definitely am a pantser. I like to go along with the ride and discover things as the characters do. But with graphic novels, just because there isn't much room to, and this will probably factor into something that I say later, because it is just such an important thing with graphic novels, I don't have room to make mistakes as much because I'm not the illustrator, and I don't want to create heavy story revisions while the illustrator is doing his or her thing. So I will discover the character motivations, and then I will write a synopsis of the story, and from there start drafting.
How is writing for a graphic novel different from other novels? Do story beats or styles differ?
When I started, and I just have two, I'm working on my third, right? So Here's not the voice of experience, is the newbie talking. One of my inspirations or teachers is Winsor McKay. He only had one page, like Little Nemo. They have to have a whole nightmare and the resolution in just something like 14, 15 panels. So I was impressed by that, and the early Terry and the Pirates and Milton Caniff and the classics. And I was impressed on how they could make a strip in a newspaper once a week and still keep the emotion going for the audience for the whole week. And I thought that was, if I can get there, I'll be at least in good company. So I tried to make my novels as if I only had one page at a time. Also, the software I started using only would let me draw one page at a time. So it sort of dovetailed one thing into the other. And so I tried to have my chapters or sub-chapters or events in the story, what you would have between three little asterisks within a larger chapter, I tried to fit those in a page. So the story is complete. The sub-story that the reader is looking at is complete in one page. And the pages themselves become, like in film, the shoot cards, and you can swap them and reorganize them and make further arcs with them. So if I tweak if I know where I'm going and I know that my character is trapped in a cave or searching her way through a cave and gets to an open giant cave and a giant boring machine comes out of the floor, I might decide to do this coming out of the floor as a 2-page spread, because it's a beautiful event full of newness, emotion, and basically it's an adventure by itself. But during the telling of where we get there, I'll try to do it in like, say 6 to 7 panels at the most for a sub-event, and up to 25 for a sequence. I measure that very carefully, because when you're trying to plan a book, you have to keep in mind that if you make one extra right page, you're going to have a left page to go with that, and your whole story shifts. Since I am the writer, the colorist, the draftsman, and everybody, and the kitchen sink, I am going here with George in the sense that he is considerate of the people that come before. I have to be considerate that I want to make another page later after this one. So I'll try to wear all my hats with consideration to the other hats, sure enough. But also that's why I write first. Not, as I said, a complete novel, but something that's, like 2 edits away from one. I don't want to draw for a week and then find out that I cannot use that page because I forgot a crucial element in the middle of it.
I feel like everything that I've done has been something that I've just kind of fallen into. So I kind of learned everything the hard way, because there's not really like an industry or like a book that like teaches you just like how to make webtoons weekly, how to meet a deadline every single week for like a whole year. I think in general, one thing I found that writing for webcomic, because I used to write stories for myself, like long written stories with like dialogue and paragraphs and stuff like that. And one thing I found about webcomics is that again, you're very limited in the amount that you can really do. Like, it's only physically feasible for me to draw about 80 panels a week consistently. And if I draw more than that, like I'm basically like screwing myself over. So I think one thing I've noticed is whenever you have a scene, it needs to convey more information than just the one thing that you're trying to tell the audience, if possible. So for example, I use the fight scene example, but if your characters are just fighting, I feel like it also needs to reveal something about what's happening in the story. It can't just be one thing. One thing that I learned the hard way is that when I write things on paper, and it's not to say that the writer has an easier job, but I feel like as the artist, I feel like having to convey something that was written on paper into an illustration is sometimes it can be easy and sometimes it can be incredibly hard. Like for example, the cave example that Joaquin pointed out, I don't have time to draw like every single image of a cave, right? So I have to make sure that when I draw a scene, I have a 3D asset of a cave preset or pre-made that I found online somewhere. So I use, artists, webcomic artists, we use a lot of 3D assets. So I decided to place my story in a fantasy palace. And at the time when I started, there was no like fantasy palace 3D asset. Like I didn't even know that I could use 3D assets. So I had to kind of learn the hard way that like, oh, you don't need to draw everything from scratch. You can, I think that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult, like having to do everything that's on paper is not always feasible. So sometimes I will literally like change the location of where the characters are just so I can make the background easier for myself. So yeah, that's just something I noticed.
It's all about production at the end of the day, right? Because you want to effectively utilize your time. And I, just like with June, I did things the hard way, even though I knew 3D. But yet I was drawing everything, and that's totally fine. But the background, I can't stand the background, honestly. It's just so tedious, and then having to draw it over and over and over and over again. And it's really the same background. I mean, I would generally like draw a huge scale background and then shift it over here and there. But in reality, if you're a 3D artist, you can create your 3D scene, have it fully rendered, and then from there, be able to incorporate it within the background yourself, changing up the angle. And that's one thing that I like about I like about graphic novel. It's essentially a camera into the world that you're creating. You're looking at your characters, like a director, and you have your actors in your scene, and you're placing them where they need to be placed. And so I think what's cool is that you can basically allow yourself to create the world, in your own mind image, and I think that's what's really effective with, which makes it very different from just writing a novel. At the end of the day, you're a story writer, and and your panels is your camera in the world that you're composing.
Obviously, there's a lot of differences in reading a prose and graphic novel, and the same goes for when you tackle them as well. So to me, the main difference when approaching the story is, like Wilson said, I also write in script format. And comic scripts tend to be a lot different than a TV or movie format script, a screenplay. There's no kind of official standard, but there are kind of loose, unofficial versions, which I tend to kind of try and follow. So the main thing I think that is the biggest difference between them is with prose, what the author is writing, you see as a reader, everything is on the page. You're getting the full experience of what that author has put down, how they've chosen to describe the world, the characters, everything. And with graphic novels, as a writer, what you're writing, the majority of, doesn't make it onto the page. You're art directing. So you're providing feedback to the artist. You're speaking to the artist. And I'm doing my best as a writer to trust the artist that they're going to see the best version of what that page should look like, what each panel should look like. And so I'm just giving enough information so that they know what needs to be on the page, and to give them enough wiggle room to interpret and expand upon if they want, and try and leave open communication with that artist to talk it out if something doesn't make sense, if they see a better way to do that. and kind of expand from there. So those are, to me, the main differences when it comes to writing. And then when it comes to pacing a story, there's also a lot of differences. A 200-page prose book is not the same as a 200-page graphic novel. There are massive differences in how those are paced out, because a page of a prose book and a page of a graphic novel are not the same in terms of what you can cover on that page. We're limited by panel count, and I especially work, again, in middle grade and YA. And with middle grade, less is more. You want to have like 5 panels or less. The less amount of dialogue you have on the page, the better. The less narration. You're really leaning on the art to tell the story. And in order to do that, you need to know where you can pare back, and you really need to be able to trust the artist and understand how that's all going to play out. So for me, when it comes to scripting, before I even get there, having an outline is so important so that you can better understand how everything's going. If little bits of it are slow, how you can jazz that up, and just working through as much of the drafting process in the outline stage for me, that really helps to make things so much more solid when you go to actually write the script and understand the pacing of the overall story. So there are a lot of different small differences. And again, when you're working in graphic novels, it's always key to just rely on your art and make sure that you are showing and not always telling.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of Stephanie, because the points that you made are similar to the points that I would make. 2 things, right? The first is that it's collaboration, right? So if you're not an author illustrator, then you need to learn to collaborate. Otherwise, graphic novels are not the medium for you. And what that means is that the artist is not working in a vacuum, right? They have their own vision as well for the story. They're not going to just defer to you in most cases. And it's actually richer if they don't, right? You want to clue them in. You want them to be able to provide their feedback on everything, right? So just having a situation or a circumstance where they are involved in every step of the process will make the story ultimately much richer. That is the first element. The second is you have to exercise brevity. So if your authorial voice when you write a prose novel is such that you tend to ramble like many authors do, and that's actually totally fine and very compelling to read, you have to learn to exercise brevity once you apply that to a script. And that is a challenge for many authors who kind of want to jump towards this new medium. So unless you can learn to do that, you will struggle to fit within these standards, because there are standards for your graphic novels genre or age category convention. I also play primarily in middle grade and YA. So, I wrote a 384-page prose novel, the one that's sitting right next to me here on this background. That would need to translate to about a 200-page graphic novel. So you can see the differences and the need for brevity.
Has it ever happened, like your vision and your illustrator has a different opinion, what you have conceptualized, and it has turned out better than what you have thought about? Like you have a vision, a basic idea in your head, and you set the process to your illustrator, and it turned out much better than what you have thought about.
To clarify, you're kind of wondering if like your writer and artist have different kind of opinions on how to tackle something. Okay. Yeah. It happens, like I'm working on a pitch right now with an artist that I'm really blessed to have gotten to work with some artists that I've been like friends with, and I already had, a relationship with. So communication can come really easy, but I'm working on a new pitch with a new artist that I'm not as familiar with. But I think in those cases, making yourself very open, knowing how to kill your darlings and not be precious about your story is really important, because like June said earlier, and I think very politely was like, sometimes the writer's work is a lot easier. And that was like so polite, because it is so much easier. It is, like it's not easy to craft a world, and like write that story, but comparably to what the artist is putting in terms of the workload, the artist is doing, like the writer's here, the artist is like, yeah. And it takes me, I don't know, anywhere from like 3 to 6 months to draft several versions of a script, whereas it's going to take, and that's like a 200-page script, and an artist, that's going to take an artist anywhere from 1 to 3 years to do. that's a substantial difference in the time that's being put into this story. So listening to your artist, giving them a voice, and making sure that they feel like that is their story too, because it is so important. So for me, having communication, starting out your working relationship and collaboration, just setting the bar for each other, asking how you like to have feedback, asking, establishing a baseline for how you two work together, and making it so that everybody feels comfortable giving feedback is really important. And I think, an artist will see the potential in something to be more interesting. Maybe for instance, I recently wrote like this one page as like a 5-panel thing, and the artist saw a way for that to be a 1-page splash page and to incorporate all the elements into this one beautiful image. And when the artist has a great idea like that, I am never going to say no. Never. There's not a world where I'm going to see that and go, I think mine's better. The artist is interpreting this in such a cool way and seeing it different than I did. And that's the best part of collaboration. And like George said, if you're not willing to compromise with an artist or with your creative team, because there are so many people that are involved in making a graphic novel.
How do you use a page or layouts to narrate your story?
Before I started Sub-Zero, ever since I was like middle school, again, I was trying to make comics for myself. And I think I was really restrained in that. So when you're making a comic by yourself, you realize the sheer amount of things that you need to know. You need to know writing, character design, like how to draw backgrounds, 3D assets, that kind of stuff, and including layout being one of them. So I think layout is actually one of my biggest weaknesses, and it's like before Sub-Zero, I had about 10 failed projects where I'd make like 3 to 4 pages or 5-10 pages of a story, and then I would just drop it. And I didn't really know why, but when I started working on webtoons, the layout is actually very simple. And as my editor says, it's there so you can kind of turn your brain off. So I don't know if everybody's seen like the webtoon long scroll format web like layout, but it's basically a long scroll on your phone, and the panels are mostly like rectangles. So there's not that much kind of brain power put into the layouts themselves. I actually realized that I could have a lot of fun with these long scroll layouts because I'm not limited by the size of a page. So sometimes I'll do these, like, I think of it as a long camera pan. So you can do like a long camera pan from the top to the bottom and just show like a long battle scene. And I think I've kind of like learned to embrace that limitless page layout that is available on the long scroll. But I will say, now that I'm trying to get the comic into print, that long scroll format is not actually that efficient. So I actually have to redraw or reformat a lot of the panels that I made that look great on my phone, but I can't really put them in a book because they're just too long. I know the designer that's actually working on it is actually having trouble, and I'm just talking to her about ways that we can like chop up the panels and kind of like trim them down to sort of fit them, and if not, I have to basically redraw them. So it's kind of like something that I keep in mind. I think if you think about it as a camera, it's a lot easier than like traditional like manga style unique paneling, I'd say.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. The first is for just general graphic novels. Variety is the spice of life, right? You want to vary your panels in terms of size, in terms of, I think that Joaquin used something about, if you arrive at a new scene, a new set piece, a new location, you give it an entire page. That is exactly what I'm talking about, right? You can't give every particular scene or panel an entire page, but you learn to identify what are the focal points and emphasize those in terms of how much attention they deserve, both in terms of number of panels as well as the amount of detail that goes into a particular panel or scene there. Loving the cat. The other thing is, keep in mind, this is something that you don't necessarily do with prose novels, the page turns, right? You want to make sure that you are providing suspense and keeping a reader's attention. And the way you do that is by encouraging them to turn the page. And so when you're doing like major reveals or things of that nature, you can build suspense and then make it so that the reveal's on the next page, right? In that odd number page. So you can play around with that particular convention. And it is a tool in your arsenal that you don't have when writing a prose novel. So that is something to keep in mind with a graphic novel.
It is basically a movie, right? And you can play with the timing and everything. How you have spacings in your panels, how you lead the eye. You know, like you're basically setting the mood on how your story should be read, and what your desired effect is. You know, like if you want, like George was saying, a reveal. Yeah, it's great to be able to position it in a way where it becomes a complete surprise when you do that page turn. You know? So I think that's one thing that's really effective with the whole graphic novel, being able to look through it like a camera lens, being able to set up shot, getting certain angles, being able to get certain reactions or moments, you know, where if somebody notices something, you have a quick close-up of the eyes, maybe their reaction to whatever they might be seeing, and then you reveal, you know, that very thing that they're seeing in a captivating way, and be creative in a limited way of how to make the most impact.
So I think everyone else has made a lot of points that I would also make, but adding to that a little bit too, is in terms of like laying out the page and the story into panels, you want a variety. I think I briefly mentioned this, but like kind of with middle grade, the most you want to do on a page, with exceptions, is like 5 panels, and more is always less when it comes to especially younger audiences. I'll say that even with adult audiences, you shouldn't want more than 5 to 6 panels on the page too. But that being said, just because the maximum that you want to keep in mind is 5 panels for graphic novels, it does not mean that every page should be 5 panels. And so breaking up your pages into interesting layouts and, you know, breaking up into splash pages, just 1-page illustrations, having 5 panels on the next page, 3 panels on the next page, giving the story and the art room to breathe and moments to really shine in the book are really vital when it comes to graphic novels, and making sure that it's not as like monotonous as you turn each page and it's the exact same layout on each page. So pacing and working as a writer who's, again, art directing for an artist, it's really vital to keep those things in mind as well. And I think it can be really intimidating for writers who haven't worked in this space to kind of approach that and keep all of these things in mind, because these aren't like set rules. They're just kind of things that you learn from reading graphic novels and from reading a variety of graphic novels and seeing what really cool things other people are doing, and understand that you can apply those to your books too, the more you kind of just research and understand how good comics work.
The other thing is composition. You know, like yeah, I think it's super important. Like even like, let's say if you're taking a photograph, you want to make sure your the object of your attention is positioned in a way that balances the entire page or the entire screen. And so that's something that you definitely should learn in doing a graphic novel, or doing any work of art. Composition is super important.
It's just like understanding, like manga and North American comics are similar, obviously, in how they lay out. They're just opposite. In comics, in North American comics, it's left to right, top to bottom. Manga is top to bottom, left to right, or right to left. Anyways, you have to understand that you're ordering the characters on the page how they speak so that it's not awkwardly placed all over the page. So composition is really important to be thinking about, and how you're putting these characters on the page. And also, you know, if you have a scene that's just 2 characters talking, how do you make that interesting? You know, like that's going to be monotonous over several pages if you're just having talking heads back and forth. So working with the artist and helping to find ways to make those moments interesting to the viewer is like all stuff that you have to think about when you're writing graphic novels. Prose allows it to be all in your head, but we're putting stuff on the page, and you have to be really conscious as a writer of what you're asking of the artist and what you're asking of the reader to consume and enjoy.
I'll start in the most pleasing order. The first thing is I read a lot of comics and graphic novels, and I've found that graphic novels, comics have a very specific size, and you cannot violate that. Diamond makes sure of that. They'll get you 3,000 smackers if you don't. But graphic novels come in every size. You can have something the size of this micro card, or something like a newspaper. It doesn't really matter. It's beautiful. But there's two things I avoid. There's many things I allow myself to do. As Stephanie was saying, you have to be entertaining. And the way is start by entertaining yourself. If you like what you're doing, there's a chance someone else will. No strange colors. I have seen people who write a dialogue blurb all in red with white lettering. That hurts after I'm in my later years, but I just turned 71, and it's boring to see something where your eyes are strained for an effect of someone who doesn't understand the theory of color. So bad contrast right there. Red and white looks good for short things, but you cannot read passages in this. Is horrible. It's like writing on yellow. Black lettering on yellow blurbs is horrible. Or white on blue. They look very good for effect, but so I take those things into consideration in my layouts. The second thing, and I want to be brief because there might be add-ons, is the theory of thresholds. One of my masters and my teachers was Jules Engels, and I worked a lot with Disney and with the Imagineering department. And I was a student in CalArts when I discovered it. And they have this thing that all the sections, say the new Star Wars section in Disneyland, and the bear section, are always going through a threshold. When you go from one section of the parks to another, you go under a bridge or through a cave or through a tunnel, because the mind of humans erases when you step through a threshold. That's the reason you go 3 times to the kitchen for the same glass of coffee or the same cup of coffee, because you once in the kitchen you keep forgetting what were you doing there. And that's not only for aging people. That happens in all ages, and there's very interesting experiments about this. The thing is that your panels are actually thresholds. The way they came about to be natural in the Aztec comic books and in the Egyptian comic books and Chinese comic books 5,000 years back, they still use thresholds. They still use a way to tell this is the end of this scene, or this is the universe of this scene, and a new thing comes after or later or whatever. So I use that. That's my only golden rule. Thresholds are to break the memory and prepare it for the next experience. So that's how I use my formats. That means that I don't use retrograde formats, things that are, say, I am speaking to a community that reads left to right, down, up to down. So I try to conform that to the way my page is read. That doesn't mean that I don't go back and forth in a natural way. It just means that if I have 3 panels on this side and 2 on this side, I better be careful what is my ordering. And I might be using arrows to carry the thing, not maybe the old style, item arrows to point to the next frame, but sometimes I use the line of view. Stephanie was talking about when you are in danger of crossing dialogue, that one character is in the wrong side of his bubble. Well, that is sometimes something you can use by cutting the scene. Then you prepare everybody because the character is looking that way. So the next one you can scrunch not the character as you would in TV or film, but the whole panel to the other side, and it works. The threshold functions, and you separate the reader's mind from the old story preparing for the new story. And that's something worth at least taking into account. Don't try to go against your own brain. Your brain has a really fantastically designed method to get reality, or what we understand as reality. Help it. Don't oppose it. And it's going to be much easier to tell your yarn.
Reading everything is valid. Audiobooks, comics, prose, all of it is valid. But that being said, a lot of people come to graphic novels because it's an accessibility thing. And we have visual learners out there who don't absorb prose books, and they can't really get into reading as a form of enjoyment. And comics change that. But there's also people who read comics because of accessibility issues too. And so when people do things with word balloons, like different colors and stuff, you're making it hard for people to genuinely be able to read that in an accessible way. And, you know, colors and how we're putting stuff on the page, you know, that affects colorblind people, that affects all kinds of stuff. And, you know, with middle grade graphic novels, we often use mixed case lettering as opposed to the all caps lettering. And that's an accessibility thing. So that's all, again, stuff to kind of be thinking about too. And just, you know, that's a really great point that Kino brought up.
I have a question, Joaquin. Is threshold different for everybody, for every graphic novel or every panel or every page?
It's like any other art form where you're telling a story. Once you establish the rules, you have to stick to them. The reader is going to learn your rules in the first page. Maybe you'll take to the second page, but by then the reader knows what to expect in terms of physical distribution of the narrative. If you violate that, you're alone on the sea with a paddle, as they say, because the reader is going to feel defrauded, and rightly so. You are violating the rules you started in the game. There's a Argentinian novelist that my mom used to read, named by Hugo Wast. Where he got his name, I don't know, but he wrote this thing that my mom used to describe as combustible bricks, things that in those days were like 500 pages, things, tomes, I would say. And it was common that by the end of the story, by the middle of the story, he would resuscitate something that had died in chapter 17, just coming from India or something. So people started to laugh about this thing, that he would forget in these long yarns who was alive and who wasn't. So he would make paper figurines, put them in his desk, and every time somebody died, he would rip the figurine and toss it. So now he knew not to write about that guy, but only the remaining ones. I just bring that as an example. You have to be consistent with your tropes in this case. We have to cater also to the readers who are like us. And that means the thing has to be readable, understandable, and consistent. You cannot change horses in the middle of the river. Sorry, not to, unless it's for the adventure's sake. Then do bring the dinosaurs.
How do you, what is something new graphic novelists should know, or pitfalls they should arrive? George?
So a couple of things that new graphic novelists should know entering the scene. The first is that, especially if you're pitching to traditional publishing, the script is everything and the pitch is everything. So be able to distill your idea, your thoughts, write the character, the conflict, and the stakes into a 2-paragraph pitch, and then be able to expound upon that in a synopsis. And then, of course, the other elements of the proposal are, you know, the artist doing their part, right, with, you know, some character sketches and whatnot, and then you delivering like about 30 to 50 pages of script. So just be mindful that you have to be thinking of it in terms of a script and a holistic project. You have to really know your story inside and out if you're pitching to a traditional publisher. The other thing would be, don't expect to get rich doing this. And this is something that would go doubly so for graphic novelists than traditional prose novelists. And the reason is because unless you're an author or an illustrator, you are splitting the advance money, you are splitting the royalties, you are splitting everything. And especially if you're an author, don't expect to get the higher end of that split. That split rightfully goes more towards the direction of the illustrator. And even if you are an author or illustrator, that advance money is going to stretch across to the 2-3 years it takes to actually produce this project. And so it ends up, quickly not being the huge sum that some might expect it to be. So just be aware, you're going to do this out of love, out of passion, as opposed to out of, some lucrative opportunity.
Yeah, I definitely agree with George on that. I mean, limit your expectations, I guess, like for sure have hopes and dreams, and, don't let that get crushed, but, tamper them down a bit, at least your expectations. Be realistic to what you hope to achieve and what you hope to expect. Now, if you start rolling into that J.K. Rowling's money, well, hey, more power to you. Hire me. But at the end of the day, yeah, this is a passion thing, and you want to be able to share your art with the world, and the best you can. Being able to get yourself noticed is super important, because you're going to be surrounded by a sea of other talented artists as well. So try to find something that can define you or separate you from the pack. Being able to understand, what you can and can't create, so modify your ideas around to your limitations, and make the best of it, because at the end of the day, you have great ideas, but what you really want to do is convey it the best you can. And so, think about, of course, what you can afford to do it on, your mediums, is it digital? Is it traditional? Like, you got to figure out how you can best get it out to the world.
Wilson is talking about like the inner life of the thing that you have to think. I would add to that, think of the physicality of the product that you're creating. Certain sizes are good and are kosher and are easy to get published. Certain sizes are nigh to impossible to get. And the difference between them is sometimes something that we as artists really would give like the time of day. Is half an inch somewhere. Well, pay attention to that half an inch, because Diamond charges $3,000 to distribute your comic. If it has some problem, they'll charge it to you first, and then they'll distribute the thing. So try to be aware of what the industry says in terms of typography, sizes, types of colors, types of papers, to avoid a world of grief, because you are going to have exactly what Wilson is talking and what George just talked about, is the how and why are you doing this work to worry about. In top of that, you don't want to worry about the physicality of it. So just try to get something that works in that department, because the other things, say the Wilson and George side of things, are going to bite you up the back rear if you don't pay attention. They'll come riding on your six, as they say in the army.
Yeah, I just want to add on to like a couple of things that everyone has said so far too, in terms of, not being a lucrative industry. Don't take deals that aren't going to be financially good for you. Art writing comics, they're a passion project. And
Yeah.
if you are taking bad deals that are not financially compensating you, and also the deadlines are like bananas, you are going to burn out. There are several publishers that are notorious for kind of doing this. And those artists that work with those and try to meet those deadlines often wind up doing one book and leaving the industry forever. It is not worth it. Self-publishing exists. There are so many other alternative methods to tell the story you want to tell. Don't settle for anyone who isn't going to value your time and your financial position. You have rent to pay, you have bills to pay. So don't ever compromise yourself. You know, like, oh my God, originally got an offer. We had a three members of the team initially brought in, myself, Insha Fitzpatrick, and Juliana Moon. We got initially an offer for $2,000 for our entire team. That doesn't even pay my rent for a month. Like, we held out and got a great deal with like HMH Kids, but you know, there's a lot of people who would have taken that initial deal, and don't do yourself dirty that way. You deserve better. Your stories deserve better, and your team deserves better, especially your artists. So keep all of that in mind when you are coming to anything in this industry. And then, I mean, I think we've otherwise really covered a lot of the things that I think are important to consider, you know, not overcrowding your pages, keeping accessibility in mind, thinking about composition, you know, all of those things are like really vital when you're coming to graphic novels. But for any other piece of advice that has helped me over the years is, if you have access to going to conventions and stuff and you want to be a writer and you're not doing the art component, talk to as many artists as possible. Talk to them, see what kind of stuff they like in their scripts, how you can be a considerate collaborator, how you can be a great collaborator. Talk to them, get an idea, and keep all of that in mind. Make mental notes on how you can be the best collaborator possible, because no one's going to want to work with you if you are a writer that just like tramples over every artist you come across. So I think taking the time and putting in the energy into understanding how much goes into art, and also even doing a 10-page short story entirely on your own, the art, the lettering, the coloring, everything, even if you don't consider yourself an artist, you are going to better understand your entire team and value the heck out of them if you do that. So
one last thing, protect your work. Copyright.
I wouldn't even, or at least have a very solid contract into place with your collaborators if you're going to do creator-owned work and work with people. Protect yourself, protect your work, 100%.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I would say if you get any kind of contract, make sure you take it to a lawyer beforehand, because I think especially in my industry, there's a lot of like younger people who want to get into webcomics and, you know, webtoons, and it's like they're literally out of college, and I was out of college, and the first contract that was put in front of me, I signed, no questions asked. And I mean, like, I don't regret it personally, but I can see how, like, you know, there are publishers out there that will take advantage of the situation. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
That's the other thing. Protect your art. Don't participate in places where they put a pixel count on you that would have you present an under quality product. If you have a contest where they are going to qualify your art, they should have bandwidth enough for you to present your best foot forward, I would say. So if your thing is, if your piece is 15 gigabytes, that's the size. It shouldn't be 5. It should be at full quality that you share it with those who can pay for it.
Do you write the script and do the art? Does a graphic novel artist need a team? Need to have a team, agent, PR, etc.?
I work with 3 other people, and we write the story together. And I generally flesh it out a bit more. I do the majority of the art. So I have an idea for what I'm looking for as far as dialogue or what's feasible. So I will basically do the editing as I go. And so, we may have a larger story in the beginning, but I will end up trimming the fat. For one, I have to consider print costs if I am printing. How many pages do I really want to, pay for? And then at the same time, I have to consider the amount of time it's going to take, because it's hard work at the end of the day. And what's great is if you can be creative with one page. I think you mentioned that, Stephanie, where if your artist, creates one page to, 4-page writing, then it's great. You've just conveyed your ideas into that one single page. So I try to look for ways to do that as well. But ultimately, I am at the mercy of what I know what's feasible for me. So I try to work within my own limitations when writing my story, and being mindful with how I do my layout as well. Like I don't have to do an entire scenario of someone drinking coffee, like pouring in the mix, and then heating it up, and I don't have to do that. That's irrelevant. You pick a cup and you drink. That's it. So, but then if it's to the advantage of the story, then sure, maybe it's really meaningful. I'll draw it out, completely. But all this to say, just creating just being able to, like work within your boundaries, it goes a long way.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've mentioned a few times now that I am primarily a writer. I edit as well, but those are separate roles for me. I don't edit the work that I write. You need, in my opinion, somebody that is not close to the work to tell you what may or may not be working with the story. So I do usually have like full teams when it comes to working on a graphic novel. And sometimes the artist will do all of the other roles, like I have a book coming out next year called Rack Pack with Whitney Gardner, and Whitney did the story with me. We did that together, but I did the script, but we came up with that. We're co-creators on that. And then she did the art, she did the color, she did the lettering. But with Oh My God, Insha and I co-wrote the script, and then Juliana came in, did the art, and we had the amazing Whitney Koger come in and do the colors. It's always like a variety. It always changes up depending on the needs of your story, the needs of your team. And I'm always an advocate for like when, again, coming back to Whitney and Rack Pack in this book coming out next year, I always want her burden to be less. She's taking on so much. Have a colorist. We can negotiate for that. We can have other people in this team alleviate some of the responsibilities in making this book. And whenever that's possible, I'm a big advocate for that. And then kind of on the more back end side of things, you don't always need an agent or a lawyer, depending on what you're working on. But if there's contracts involved and you don't have an agent, like June said, always have a lawyer look over anything you're signing. You do not want to give your intellectual property over to somebody else. There's a couple publishers that if you're not paying attention, will take 100% of your IP, and they are there to adapt things into profitable movies, TV, other mediums, and you're going to get cut out of that deal. Always have a lawyer look over that. Always make sure that you are involved and have the say that you want to say, all of that. And if you want to work in the traditional book market, again, that's more, Simon and Schuster, HarperCollins, all that stuff, as opposed to the direct market like Marvel, DC, Image Comics. You need an agent to navigate that for you. You need an agent to advocate for you, to get your rights, to get royalties, to get a decent advance. You need somebody to help navigate that. And I've seen over the years, publishers sometimes like guffaw at people who will try to bring agents into the mix. And I will say, if there's any publisher editor or anybody that makes you feel crummy for trying to get a lawyer or an agent to look over your paperwork, that's a red flag, and you should not be working with those people, because lawyers and agents are there to represent you and your best interests and the best interests of the things that you are putting the time and energy into and your passion. And yeah, I'm a big advocate for always having someone in your corner to back you up when you feel like your voice isn't being heard.
So, I mean, like, as somebody who, if I'm just going to say, if you have to do it all, I was in a position where like I had to do it all because I didn't, I didn't have like a money for a course, like when I was just starting out. And thankfully, I think we live in a time where technology has advanced so much that, there are 3D assets for backgrounds. So you don't have to draw backgrounds. There's even 3D models for characters. And I do feel like specifically for comics, it's about like the experience and the story. It's not always as much as having beautiful illustrations. And to that point, I'd say, as advice is to tell people to not be like perfectionists in the way the illustration or the art looks all the time, simply because it's never going to be perfect. And I feel like your vision is always going to be a lot grander than the reader's vision, like what they see. So I feel like if you can take 10% of your vision and put it down on paper, like the reader won't know any better, right? So yeah, like don't be too much of a perfectionist, because again, having to do it all by yourself, you have to come to terms that you need to be a jack of all trades, and you're not going to excel at everything. Like you have to be okay with that. It's like, there's no way you can definitely improve, but you can't excel at absolutely everything. And that's why big studios have multiple people who excel at the one thing that they do, but you just have to do it all. So but I would say to really embrace like creative laziness and find ways to think outside the box to make your workload easier so that you can put your work out there. Because otherwise, you'll be like me and you're gonna hold off on publishing a comic for like 10 years because you thought you were not prepared for it. So I say just like do what it takes to put your work out there, and 100%, there's always going to be someone who connects with your experience and wants to read that vision.
Yeah, done is better than perfect. That is as an editor, I will tell everyone I work with, just get it done. We can figure things out later. But yeah, you're exactly right. If you keep putting up roadblocks for yourself, you're never going to do it. And you just got to take that time to make it happen if that's something you're passionate about.
I work alone. I have been traveling all my life, and I move from one place to another. My friends are not necessarily writers or artists like I am. I have a lot of musician friends. The school I went to insisted on the arts, and there were a lot of musicians. I became one very young as a flute player and later synthesizers and things. So yeah, you don't need a team, but it's good to have humans around.
Yeah.
As far as need, we are creators. If I am in a bubble, and the pandemic just provided me for a different bubble, and then I started trying to do use the 3D tools in a different way and make a graphic novel, an animated graphic novel. So I mean, the head continues working no matter what you're doing. But yeah, as I said, you don't need a team, but it's really nice to work with other humans, and the warmth and the simple community is fantastic. Now that I'm working in this project of a animated comic strip or animated graphic novel, I am finding the software I'm using is extremely weird to use because it uses, I'm not going to go into nerdy stuff, but it basically paints in real time. And you have to know, I'm a 3D old hand, but this is different stuff. So I found that people in Ireland, in Kenya, in Egypt, in Swansea, and in Los Angeles, and in New York, I should not forget him, are helping me out. I make a question in a Discord or Slack, and I get, oh yeah, why my character's neck is flaring out like a flower. That doesn't look, oh, because you have so many bones in the neck and you should have so many. And so, I mean, the community thing is really important in the arts. That's all I want to say. It's you can do it alone, sure enough. I mean, Cervantes wrote the Quixote without any helper, and that's more than I will ever do. But it is so cool to have someone by who says, "Ah, you forgot the accent. Oh, that's not the way you type that." Or simply, "Man, that's kind of sucky." Or, "Man, that's cool what I just saw. That's really nice." That is humans. I mean, we are not doing this for artificial intelligences, which are not artificial and are not intelligent. And there's another thing, they cannot replace us. That'll never happen. Don't worry. Uh, the same thing was said of television, of comics, of the printing press. Forget it. Humanity is too strong. We're like cockroaches. But never mind. That's why we like each other. And I'm enjoying this conversation with all of us.
Okay, so we move on to our next question. Are they good tools or resources to use when creating a graphic novel?
I actually do run a website called Creator Resource, and it is specifically tools, resources, page rates from both publishers and like traditional publishers and comic book publishers. And it has contract templates. It has for pitches too, and all other things. So like, not to like to my own horn, I provide links to a lot of other things too, but I do my best to have a place, a one-stop shop where people can learn more about the comic book industry, understand how to navigate it, thrive in it, and hopefully not get taken advantage by publishers and stuff. So whether you are trying to do something as a self-published creator, whether you're trying to go more traditional routes with, you know, licensed work at Marvel or DC, or again, the traditional publisher route with graphic novels, I try to have resources available for people there, and a sister site as well to help people called Creator Advisor, which exists on Twitter to help people connect with other creators on projects for collaborations and paid work. So I have those two things that exist to try and help out. And then also, like, if you're an artist and want to learn how to do something, YouTube. You don't need school anymore. Like, there's so many places that you can go to learn, and there's so many amazing self-taught artists out there. One of my favorite humans and like favorite artists is a guy named Taran Clark, and like a lot of his stuff is self-taught, and now he's like on every Marvel cover. You know, like, you don't need to be in school these days to be a successful artist. You just need to be willing to learn and find those things. And so YouTube and other places that are just free are your best friend.
We're living a paradigm shift. We as comic or graphic anythings or some things are participating in this. The planet is moving from a mostly printed page to a mostly audiovisual communication system. Be that graphic novels, be that YouTube. YouTube is the modern day encyclopedia. It's not like, it's like, it is actually the de facto, because the paradigm shifted from the reading word, the printed page, to the audiovisual communication. And YouTube is like Vimeo, video, all that is the same thing, the same shift. And we are popular now because we're part of that wave, that historical social wave where communication shifts to more audiovisual things. Look at the emoticons, the emoji. We are capable now. There was a several years ago the Eternity and Neon series by Greg Bear, who posited that people would pict to each other instead of just talk to each other. They would send images. And we're doing this. I mean, I send people an emoji with like big tears of laughter, and they know that I found that thing funny. And we're beginning to communicate I posit that it's a shift of paradigm, and we're communicating in a more audiovisual manner. We're part of that. And that's why I applaud my choice of letting Stephanie go first, because yes, that's the kind of resources that we have now. I am going to go one lower because I have to. You know, my standards are low, but not maybe that low. But I go into the internet all the time, and I even look for, say, I need a balustrade of some sort to place my characters. I would start looking for actually constructions of that in Google Images or something. And when I find one in the right angle, phew, I snatch the sucker. I fire my Corel, my trusty Corel Draw, and start cutting and masking things. And suddenly I have a mock-up of the space I want to have the action in, complete with balustrade, flowers, and they don't match. But now I know what it looks like. I turn to my trusty Maya program and make the things there. And, you know, I don't want to build this. I would simply build a relief and texture map it with something Greek. God. So I admit I'm using Unreal Engine for this live action comic graphic novel. It's all with characters and stuff. And I think that we are living in a marvelous time because we have all the fantastic inventory of the previous generations, plus the fantastic electronic inventory that we have now with the internet. And that's not like, you know, small change. We can get the complete history of art. I mean, look at the AI conundrum. It is possible because the internet is such a wide, you know, inventory of images annotated and so forth. And I welcome it. I don't think it's ever going to be, humans are the threat, not technology. Technology is just a can opener. You can kill somebody with a can opener, sure enough, but you shouldn't. You should open cans.
I think it's more about the fact that it needs to have an ethical way to compensate the artist at this point in time.
Absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
But we're gonna, yeah.
That what is going to happen, Stephanie, is that artists are wising up and say, "Oh no! You use my material to train your bug. You pay me.
You gotta pay me." That's right.
Right.
I didn't put it up.
I agree with that so much that I am laughing at Hollywood's pretension that they're going to have AI write the scripts and they're going to get rid of the writers. Yeah.
That's a joke.
Anyone who has followed this AI thing sees that the first time you see one of these images, it's, oh my God, it's so new. And then they show you the second one, and it's pretty much the same thing. And then the third and the fourth. And by sometimes you say, oh, yeah, they look really nice, but I can recognize them. They have the sameness because there is no soul, kiddies. They're not really intelligent, and most importantly, they're not aware. There's no consciousness anywhere in there. The Russians made this test where they put like 5,000 kids in a stadium doing really rote things. You receive a yellow paper, you pass on a green one. You get a blue one, you shift it for a red one, you pass it in front, that type of thing. At the end of the day, the kids had done a calculating. They had obtained a square root of something, and they have multiplied two numbers without knowing, proving that a computer doesn't need consciousness in order to operate. So I don't worry about technology. I worry more about humans. We're pretty perverse. So I'll keep writing, trying to talk to the ones who are not already convinced. There's nothing so useless as preaching to the choir, right? So we're going to keep talking to the ones that say, no.
I'm a very frugal artist, you know, so if it's free, I'll look into it, you know. But Blender, you know, is a great resource if you're into like you know, doing 3D assets and stuff. I'm sure June probably gonna say that same thing. um, there's you know, for all your art, you know, like I use Clip Studio, and of course I tried to escape. I did try escaping Adobe, you know, to get into a software that wouldn't monetize and force you into a subscription model. But Clip Studio is going into that too. So, you know, there's free resources like Critter, uh, and I believe GIMP is still out there somewhere. And and as far as everything that was said, you know, like you know, yeah, like there's just different types of mediums you can use, you know, at the end of the day. Um, I go to the University of YouTube myself, you know, to get all my info, to learn as much as I can. That's always a great research resource. Um, yeah, that's all I can think of right now.
I mean, 100% agree with the YouTube. Like, I watched I think for almost like everything, even like how to use different software. I feel like honestly, when making comics, there's probably 100 different ways to do the same thing. And I think almost like the method doesn't necessarily matter as long as it works for you. But even something as simple as, you know, slicing a JPEG, you know, because we work in these long 20,000 pixel strips. It's like you have to slice those. And I had no idea how to do it. I was originally manually doing it by hand, and I realized like, oh, there's a feature in Photoshop or even Clip Studio that helps you like auto slice, and it's just
Mhm.
that kind of thing. YouTube in general, but I do wish that there was more information on dealing like the business aspect of kind of like working and like pitching to agents, dealing with lawyers, dealing with editors, that kind of stuff. So I'm actually going to look into Stephanie's site because seriously, like those kinds of things overwhelm me. And like, mind you, I have a background in accounting. So I was okay kind of keeping track of my expenses. And I knew that I could like deduct whatever expenses, you know, basically deduct anything that I use for my business, right? Like even going out with meals with my assistants, like people need to know that they can deduct those things. But in general, like I think dealing with lawyers and agents, that is something that I don't find as available and easy on YouTube. And even when I do, sometimes it's very like wordy and like lengthy. And yeah, I will say I'm still looking for that kind of stuff. But when it comes to creating the work itself, you know, I've watched a ton of video essays and I've watched a ton of how-to tutorials on creating work. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on this topic.
Last question for our session. What are some of the good platforms to share graphic novels?
I failed to find a way to share my graphic novels the first one took 5 years to make. I had to teach myself a lot of things. Second one was only 3 years, which got me better, but I could not find how to publish it with, the official sources. So I ended up doing it myself on Amazon and discovered that even though they say they publish graphic novels, they are not set up for such. So I had to use a format of a textbook, change things around, and basically improvise my format. And now I am paying through the nose for that because they think that, for instance, they don't let you have margins. If you want to leave a white bleed around your page, your frames, for some reason, it has to be their size, no matter if you're paying for the whole page. So if you want to make it is very expensive because you have to basically reformat your whole thing to fit their ever-changing rules. I had to fill all my white uh, pages, the margins, the bleeds, with a soft ramp from blue to white, from brown to green, different things. So they would see color there and leave me do my distribution as a graphic novel and not as a book. It was gruesome. Also, the number of pages. They were coming up with all kinds of things to lower the resolution of my book. And I said, no, 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 no. I am paying for making a complete book. And if that is 5 gigabytes, that's what it is. I'm not going to take 30 megabytes because you don't understand the difference between a textbook and a graphic novel. So the price is that from $20, I had to raise the price to 30, which leaves a lot of my potential readers out, not the real ones, because 20 to 30 is not that much, but the kids really, 20 to $30, it's a difference. So, well, I had to bite that bullet. So I couldn't use comicsology or whatever the name of that thing, because then my book had to be really thin and had to be in the size of a comic and certain other things. When I talked to the Chinese, they could fill my garage with copies for like nothing. Here in the States is like between $6 and $17 per book. For the Chinese, no problem. It's between $3 and $6 per book, no problem. But I have to order like 5,000 at the same time. My garage doesn't fit them, so I had to go with the publish on demand model that is what Amazon amalgamated now. And there's only 2 competitions that are even worse deal. I am happy with the fact that my novels have a presence in the internet. They can be bought, and I have talked to people about what they entail, and they have said, oh, let me buy one. So the fact that they are out there and available trumps to me the fact that they had to be somewhat expensive now. So that is my resource. I didn't find anything like very practical, and I opted for this version. It's not the best, but it lets my work have a presence, and that's where it ends too.
I mean, I always feel like every time I'm on a like any kind of like interview or podcast or anything, I'm always like the big advocate for Webtoon, because I'm like, I have my dream job at Webtoon. So I do think that I definitely recommend Webtoon so Webtoon has 2 basically components, and I think a lot of current publishers of comics, like online publishers, the way they work is they'll have like a website, a part of the site where you can upload for free. So you're uploading for free. You're not signed with a contract with the company at all. Everything, your IP is your own, like 100% you own everything. So you upload, and sometimes there are monetary incentives. Like when I first started publishing to their, free platform, it's called Canvas. It was called Discover at one point. But I remember they had this like creator money fund or $1 million creator fund, and they said that link your Patreon, and then as long as you meet the requirements of 20,000 weekly or monthly page views or something like that, or episodic views, you will get basically a max cap of $1,000. So I was in college and I was making like $1,000 on just uploading like 2 uploads a week or 2 uploads a month. And I thought that was absolutely extraordinary as a college student, like, because I was making, doing commissions for $35 and $35 in general. And first of all, I'm not even drawing the thing that I like. I'm drawing this for somebody else. So to get $1,000 to do your own thing was like absolutely amazing. And then I also remember back then they said that their reader count was about 50 million active users on the app, and now it's something closer to 80 million. And I noticed that when I publish my webcomic on this site, it's the readers themselves are actively looking for new content. So I was getting a ton of comments, and I was like, wow, this is more interactive than like me posting it on Twitter, on Instagram, on Patreon, anything I've ever worked on. So there's that aspect. And then like a year after I started publishing again, Webtoon offered me a contract. So that's when the actual deal part of like, you get paid, maybe sometimes you offer up a percentage of your IP, or you get to keep your whole IP if you choose to. And like you can work that out. But I definitely recommend for anybody doing any kind of online comic to at least post on these platforms, because they have so many comics on there that a ton of people will always be searching for new content. So they might run across into your comic, and a lot of people use it as like a way to first, if they're not already earning money off the website itself by just posting, they're also using it as a way to direct people to their unique websites or their Patreons. Like they'll say, my next, you can read the next update early on my Patreon. So they use it as a way to funnel readers to their websites. Again, as like a comic creator, you also have to play the hat of your own marketing team. So I do recommend posting to basically literally anywhere that you possibly can, like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. I personally am not a huge fan of social media, but I understand that I have to do it. And there's also so many ways to make income, like derivative income as a creator. You can either have an online shop. Some people will do link exchanges where they show like the tools that they use on, and whenever people click on those tools, they get a percentage, or they get money from just people clicking those links. There was also, Instagram Reels was paying out, like I was getting $100 a month just from posting Reels. They recently ended that, but I believe like YouTube Reels or YouTube Stories is still doing a thing where they're incentivizing people to post, Reels for money. So yeah, basically anything that you can do to get your work out there, I highly, highly recommend just doing it.
I actually have webtoons as well.
Mhm.
And for me, it was more experimental, just to see if I can get more visibility. Whether or not I continue, I'm not sure yet. But one thing I am really interested in is YouTube. And also, big thing is just going out and to comic shows and convention. The thing I see with online, it is a bit of a challenge because there's a lot of noise around. And it's a bit deceptive in a sense where, let's say, with social media, where you're like, okay, well, I got a lot of likes, but I'm not selling a lot of books, kind of thing. Where it's like, does it really tell you the correct numbers? Does it really tell you who your audience really is? Are you targeting them correctly? And the way I see going out in like book shows and conventions, bookstores or whatever, is that that's your focus group right there. You're able to engage with your audience in real time, and it helps you pitch your stories effectively at the end of the day. And I feel like just that human connection is also important too. I'm old school for that, I guess. I don't always like looking at a screen, but if I have to, for sure, I'll try to engage. But just that human touch, I think, is just special. Just hearing, oh man, I really love what you do, and I really appreciate the work. That motivates you, that's lights a fire in having to sign your work, to someone, and give a word of inspiration, that online doesn't do that for me, So I really do appreciate that side of the industry. It's still available. It's still around. If you can get yourself a booth, invest in it, and that's great. Small local shows or maybe local bookstores, because what's cool is your local bookstores will definitely be open to you doing a book signing,
Wilson, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Yeah, bookshops, 100%. Definitely, like the human connection is such an important thing too. And like as somebody who had all their books come out in the pandemic, getting to do that is important. But then adding to that really quick as well, knowing your audience, knowing what your book is versus the show, and whether that's not the appropriate place, but whether you're going to do well in there. Like obviously, like my books are not going to do well at a zine fest, and that sort of thing. But I wholeheartedly agree with that. And then just as well as the community, like the cons thing, if you have drink and draws in your community, if you have stuff like that, that'll help you get out into the world and meet your peers. Your peers are your greatest tool when it comes to sharing your work and your graphic novels. And like I run community events in Toronto regularly so that people can do that. But then I'll just jump to my last point here. And having a website is your biggest tool too. Your website for you and a home base where people can find all of your work. It's great to have one for your book, but your book can exist on your website, and having a central place where everyone can find you, easy peasy, is a great way to do that. And whether you have a newsletter or a blog that acts as a newsletter kind of thing, that'll go such a long way. And for the love of God, put contact information on your website. As an editor, I cannot tell you enough how I will not be hunting people down across various platforms to find you. I shall not be logging into my 20-year-old DeviantArt to send you a message. Have an email or a contact form on your site. But yeah, those are like everyone else kind of covered what I would say too. But a centralized home for all your socials and everything is, I think, the best way to kind of have people find you and what you're doing.
So do you have any like social media where you're active, like Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram?
Yeah, you can find me on my website for Dark Child issue 1, 2, and 3. Go to G7 Comic. That's comics with an S at the end. G7comics.com. All of our links are there. We have stuff on Amazon. We have also on Comixology, physical books you can get from Kablam Comic. Well, I'm sorry, from Kablam actually. Comixology is the digital format. And you can check out, of course, like I said, Amazon as well. And for those who are just curious about my comic book, issue 1 is on digital format on our website, free for download. So check it out if that's something you're interested in. That's G7comic.com. We're also on Facebook. Look for Dark Child. We're on Instagram, Dark Child Comic. But you go to the website, click on the link in the header. You can check out G7 Dark Child on Twitter. And for the sake of argument, just look for Dark Child on Webtoon. I'm there as well. So.
Awesome. Everything is Junepurrr, like June, like the month, and purr with 3 R's, like the cat. Yeah, so it's like my Instagram, my Twitter. I don't have a website because I feel like my website is almost like the Webtoon, but and the link is kind of long, but just know that Sub-Zero updates on Mondays on Webtoon, and you will probably see it if you look at the lineup. It's usually like within the top 4. But yeah, Junepurrr on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Usually I'm usually there.
Yeah, I'm on all social medias. My username is hello, like the greeting, and cookie, like the treat.
Okay.
So hello cookie is me, and my website is Stephanie Cooke, Cooke with an E.ca, like my last name, stephaniecooke.ca. And hello cookie across everything. I'm most active on Twitter and Instagram.
I'm not on Twitter. When it was purchased, I quit. I am on the free internet. I'm on LinkedIn. You can email me, and yeah, I'm in a lot of discords because of this Unreal thing that I'm starting. So welcome, find me and pester me. I love it. I love to hear from other creators who are not living good enough alone. So
Nice meeting you, Wilson, Stephanie, Joaquin, and June. It was lovely, amazing meeting you and talking with you. I had so much fun.